Welcome to the session. Today we've got Daniela Gachago, Bronwyn Swartz, and Cheryl Belford from CPUT in South Africa, offering us Seminar 2 and on innovative approaches to blended learning during times of disruptions. And today's focus is on the ethics of care. So Daniela, I'm going to hand over to you. We look forward to your seminar today, ladies, especially after such an energetic one yesterday. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Nicola, and welcome back to those who made it today. I'm very happy to see you. We had a very interesting conversation yesterday, I think, during our, at least for us, an interesting presentation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And just to summarize, so I don't know, were you all there yesterday? Could you just quickly raise your hand? Kath, yes. Kath Olufemi, were you not there yesterday? Did you manage to listen to the recording or to have a look at some of the two videos that we shared? Ray still raising his hand. Okay, maybe just to quickly summarize, if you didn't manage to have a look, we spoke about how some of our lecturers at CPUT responded to the FISMAS 4 protests in 2015 and in particular in 2016, and we spoke about how the disruption could potentially be seen as some positive energy towards moving lecturers more into experimenting with technology and moving more towards an open educational practice. And the two lecturers that shared their practices yesterday, Cheryl and Bronwyn, were two of these I would say e-learning champions at our institution, who took the disruption and the closure of the campus into their stride and tried to make the best of it and move their teaching completely online, and were successful. So these are two examples where lecturers actually negotiated with their students and found ways of finishing the academic project, continuing to teach, to cover content, and assess completely in an online way. So, how we ended the presentation is with a lot of questions around the ethics of that, because from the audience, from you, came questions like, what happened to students who didn't have access? What happened to students who didn't have data? What happened to students who didn't want to continue the academic project because they believed in the student protest? How did lecturers negotiate or position themselves when they decided to continue the academic project? Even us as e-learning support people, offering online guides on how to teach and learn and assess online during those times meant in some ways countering the student protest, offering alternatives to halting the academic project, offering resources and technology that would further, or that might further, advantage the students who have resources, who have access to technology compared to those who don't. So what became really interesting for us is in this conversation around how the protests allowed some lecturers to become more innovative and more creative. There were also a lot of questions that came up around the ethics and whether or not the use of technology, or whether or not people like us who provide that kind of support are really as apolitical or as neutral as some of us would like to be positioned. Or like, I remember our director told us very clearly that we've got a mandate to support the academic staff, and if there is need to support them in the use of technology, we have to do so. But I immediately questioned that, because anything we did at that time meant an ethical decision to either support or not support the protest. One could not say I'm supporting the protest in principle, but then on the other hand offering all sorts of support and negotiating and facilitating an academic project in alternative ways, because it was not possible on campus anymore. So yeah, so by the end of last year, there were lots of very interesting conversations I found around these ethical dilemmas and what it meant, and what it meant in particular for the individual lecturer. So this is where I'd like to start this seminar. So yesterday we spoke a lot about what people did and what people did really well and successfully, and both lecturers reflected on how their students reacted to it and engaged with it, and actually all managed to succeed and do really well in the final assessments. But today I would really like to open up a space to be a bit more, or to ask questions around the ethics of doing this. And what I found really helpful in thinking about the ethical dilemmas or tensions that came up is using Joan's Tronto ethics of care framework, which is an ethical framework that looks at ethics a little bit differently than others. It's less normative, it's less absolute, it's less right or wrong. It allows more space for negotiation or for a more contextual approach to the ethics that I think is really important in our context. So, Joan, so what we are going to do in this seminar is I'm going to give a very brief introduction into Joan Tronto's work around the ethics of care, and in particular on what she defines the characteristics of good care, because she says there's also bad care. We can't fool ourselves that all care must necessarily be good. And then to see how we could apply this normative framework, the ethics of care, to our own context. And both Cheryl and Bronwyn luckily are back and here and can reflect on their own practice through that frame. And then I hope we'll get into a conversation with you and to see what you feel, how you would, what your response to this is. Welcome, Alice. So, just a quick check-in. Am I still loud and clear? Can you all follow me? Is it all fine? There are a lot of people are typing. Any sound is perfect. Okay, good, great. So Joan Tronto is a professor in political studies at the University of Minnesota. She comes from a social care, social work background, but she's always been interested in how care links to democracy, and so she sees care as a political project. So she would argue that effective democracies would have to think about who does care, for whom care is given. So it's her newest book is called A Caring Democracy. So rather than seeing care as something that's being left to the people, to immigrants, and seeing care as menial work, either very lowly paid or even unpaid, if one thinks about women's work at home and in the care of children, she believes that care has to be centered as a political project. And what's really interesting about her work is that she sees care less as a disposition, so she sees care less as something that somebody inherently has or doesn't have. So this idea that there are people who are better in doing care, which is one of the arguments why women have been traditionally given the role of caregivers, she says it's actually a practice. It's not something that you have, but it's something that you do. And this is already a huge shift in terms of argument of who should be doing the care, because she says actually care can be done by anybody. It's a practice, and it's not just a practice, but it's an ethical practice. So it's in the practice of caring that we need to think about our own ethics. So so rather than looking at big questions around ethics, whether or not you're for the death penalty, or whether or not, I don't know, the typical big ethical dilemmas that we usually engage with at school, or in philosophy or in ethics discussion, she says the real ethics actually emerge from everyday practices. When we care about ourselves and in our care for the other, how we do care, for whom we do care, what we do when we care, that's actually when ethics come in most strongly, much more strongly and more importantly than in the big questions, in the big ethical questions that we usually engage with. So how she defines ethics, and I think her definition explains it very well. So she says it's a specious activity. So it's something that humans do, and it defines humans. So the ethic, the act of caring, the practice of caring is what defines us as human beings. And it includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world, so that we can live in it as well as possible. And this, I think, is really, really important. So she doesn't adhere to some not attainable standard of care, but she says caring is actually something that you try to do in everyday life, every second of your life, to live as well as possible. And this word does not just include us and our bodies, but it includes our environment, everything that interconnects, that links us, that interweaves us in a complex, life-sustaining web. So it's much more than just caring for the next human being. It's caring for everyone and for the whole world, for non-human and human matter, for the environment, for the ecology, for animals, so that we can live as well as possible. I hope. Are there any questions so far? So it's a very different way of defining ethics. If anybody of you is interested in ethics, normally ethics would be defined in a very different way. So for her, what's really important in this is that this ethical practice is a relational practice. So the ethics is not just a one way, it's not just a caregiver giving care to the caretaker, but it's first of all a mutual reciprocal responsibility, so that the people involved in this care relationship are mutually responsible for each other. And it's not just, what's really important, it's not just this dyadic relationship between a mother and a child, or between the teacher and the student, or between a nurse and the patient, but she sees this ethical practice as involving everyone that's concerned or that is in any way has a stake in this caring relationship. So decisions about good care need to be taken by everyone that's involved in the care practice. And this, again, very importantly, is different, and contextual, situational, is different from one context to the next. So we are, first of all, both caregivers and caretakers, care receivers, at different times in our lives, but we also are in different care practices in the different contexts of our lives. And each and every care practice and each and every context is different and needs different people at the table. Decisions will be taken differently depending on context and depending on situation and depending on the people that are involved. And I think that's really important for our conversations about the ethics of care, if we frame our own decisions that we took during the FISMAS-4 process within this framework of the ethics of care. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's a practice, and as a practice it has to be negotiated. among all the stakeholders involved. I like Tony's comment. Yes, it is about community in the smallest, largest, and most interwoven and ecological ways. Absolutely. And it's really interesting because for those who have engaged a little bit in posthumanism, although Tronto's definition very much starts with the human and defines human as carers and as the ethical practices linked to the human, in her most recent work, she actually challenges this a little bit and says actually the ethics of care can also relate to non-human matter. That's an aside for those who are the geeks who are interested in posthumanism. So care is not always good, and care practices ethics. The ethics of care is not an easy context, and there are lots of tension and dilemmas when it comes to care. There are many competing needs. So in every caring situation, there will be the needs of the caregiver, the needs of the care receiver, the needs of the institution, the needs of each and every stakeholder that's involved in this caring relationship. And these needs, they're often the competing needs. Who takes the decision? Where does the buck stop? At whose needs are more important in that caring relationship? And again, that's something that has to be negotiated among everyone involved at the table. There are also power differentials involved. The caregiver has always more power than the care receiver, and that's a relationship. That power differential has to be recognized. So not recognizing, she talks about privileged irresponsibility. So that is if people who have privilege do not recognize the privilege, and she argues that that's actually an unethical practice because it allows the privileged person to remain in their privilege without challenging that privilege. So it's about recognizing these power differentials and working with these power differentials. And there's always potential for abuse in care relationships. So there's always the potential that the caregiver can abuse the care receiver who is in a weaker power relationship. So I think it's important to say is that not all care is good care. So you might believe that you're doing the best for your students, but it's actually not. And she says the two main dangers, or the dark sides of care, as she sometimes calls it, is that care can be paternalistic and care can be parochial. And I think that's really important for us when we think about our context and the fees must fall in particular. So care that's paternalistic would mean that, and it has to do with the privileged irresponsibility, it has to do with the caregiver seeing him or herself as the one to take positions, as the one who reaffirms power differentials. So rather than, for example, engaging in a conversation or in a dialogue with the care receiver about what the best care would be that they would need, it would be a caregiver deciding this is what I'm going to do. And I am in power, I have the authority, and this is what I'm going to do because I don't believe that the people I care for have actually the authority or the power or the knowledge to be part of this decision-making process. So that would be care that's paternalistic. It's a one-way care. It's only the caregiver caring for the care receiver and not seeing that relationship as reciprocal and mutual. And care can also be parochial, and what she means by that is that you only care about the people right around you. So you only care about your students in your class, and you don't look at the larger, broader picture of, for example, our university. And I think that's a really important element when we start thinking about whether or not our practices are ethical. For example, when you continue with the academic project during the Fees Must Fall movement. So to maybe make it easier for us to think about these practices, she has defined initially 4 characteristics of a good ethics of care, and then later on added a 5th element. And her four first elements are, so how she would define a good ethical practice is that first of all, one has to be attentive to the people that you care for, that you care about. So you first of all have to see that there's a need. Yeah, if you're not attentive, you might not even see that there's a need. So the first step towards an ethics of care or an ethical care practice is to be attentive to whoever you care for, to their needs. And then the second step, and I think that's again really interesting in our context, is to actually, after you have identified this need, yeah, whether it's a need for a continuing of the academic project, or there's a need to stop the academic project, or there's a need for more communication, or there's a need for more collaboration, or whatever need you have identified, that you then decide you will take on responsibility. So it's that caring for. So you have identified the need, and rather than saying, I'm waiting for my HOD or for the dean or for the VC to tell me what to do, you're actually taking responsibility for that need. You say, I feel responsible to cater towards that need. And as a third characteristic in this framework is that you actually need the competency. You need to be competent to respond to that need. So it's not enough to see the need and to say, I will try and address that need, but you actually need to be able. You need to be competent and proficient. You need to be prepared to attend to those needs. So that's another really interesting element, I think, when we later think about, for example, Cheryl and Bronwyn's practice, because we already said yesterday that one of the reasons they did so well during the FISMAS Fall, because they had already started thinking about how to offer teaching and learning in alternative ways. So they were prepared, so that competency was there. And then what's really the fourth element, then you have established a need, you have decided you are the one responsible to address that need, and you feel competent enough to do so, and you actually you design an intervention to address the need. You need to be responsive to your students. So you need to listen to them. You need to see, okay, now that I have done this intervention, now that I have offered alternative content delivery mechanism, or now that I have opened alternative communication channels, what do my students tell me about how they perceive to experience these interventions? So the care receiver must be able to give you feedback. So there must be a mutual line or an open line of communication so that you can listen, so that they are able to give feedback and you are able to listen to that feedback. And then as a fifth element, and she has added that quite recently when she wrote her Caring Democracy, and I think again that talks to parochialism, but it's really interesting in our context is the solidarity aspect. So it's not just caring for you students in your class and your small context, your immediate context, but it's actually to think about how this practice with your students impacts on the larger society as a whole, on the institution as a caring institution, and then also the society as a caring society. So to see whatever you do, your own individual practice, as linked into a larger context of caring needs in a society. So she calls that caring with. So that, yeah, I think I want to stop there. This is really very briefly, and I mean, there are lots of YouTube videos by Joan Tronto, lectures of her. So if you're interested, she speaks very well, and she's very accessible. What I like about her theory that it's compared to other theoretical frameworks, hers is a really accessible theoretical piece of work, and a lot of people have engaged with it, also in higher education. I think it's an interesting way of looking and thinking about our own practices. So I'd like to now move this over to you, Cheryl and Bronwyn. I know Cheryl has prepared a slide. Do you want to take over and start thinking about how you would respond, Or...
I'm here, Daniela. Maybe you could just move to my slide. If we just refer back to Daniela's slide of the attributes of ethical care, I think it's reflected in the slide that I'm presenting here. It doesn't strictly follow the order, but the essence of it is there. Now, I just wanted to highlight that we did what we did because we were clearly instructed to try and complete our academic project, and we responded simply because we care. There was no greater reason to do it. I had excellent communication with my students, but I worked very, very hard at it because I was willing to use all the portals. And submission dates come up very importantly because students felt, why are we being subjected to submission dates? But I explained to them that it was just a way to manage them through. If they started during FMF, it would be prudent to finish during FMF and not to leave it laying over to the next semester, because simply it's not a productive environment to work like that. So we had a conversation on all the portals about submission dates, and it actually turned into a positive rather than a negative if left unexplained. So communication was very, very important on that particular point. I never processed any marks until the semester closed officially, but I think from the feedback and the interaction I had with students on particular concerns they had or problems that they had, they could see in their own work when they were doing better than they would have done without the communication, feedback, etc. So at the end, when I processed the marks, they had enjoyed individual feedback from me, even though it was very specific and not too long-winded. But I also circulated a general feedback on the project to highlight to students where they needed to reflect, for example. And, when I marked the final test, I could see that some students had made the effort accordingly, to reflect on their work and get extra preparation for the exam. So if I think over my whole process, I can honestly say that I never directly in any way compromised the student or the individual academic project. I think I more than ever before, in fact, toed the line and stuck to the rules. But it was just that effort that I made to pave a way for them to do something rather than to sit idly and do nothing. And I think that just recently I realized in my process that students were able to be anonymous because, I appreciated how important that was, and I made it a priority to respond, with that respect in mind. So that is my ethical reflection. And honestly, I think because I knew that I was acting in a way that was ethical, I never really summarized, a process on the ethics that I practiced. It was just something that I did. I didn't think about it. Okay, that's enough for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's really interesting. Bronwyn, do you want to say something?
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can all hear you really well.
Sorry, I didn't prepare a slide. And if Daniela, if you wouldn't mind going back to your original slide, I hadn't thought about my practice in the sense that you presented it using those key terms, which was attentive and responsibility, competent, responsive, and solidarity before. I think my approach is as opposed to looking at the project as merely an academic project. The reason why people are at university, the reason why people go to institutions of higher learning is really because they want to have a better future. And with that goal in mind, and I don't know if it's because anything to do with my own personal position in the family, being the eldest, or my upbringing, or something like that. But that has always been something that's important to me, and I think that has driven my practice. So the practice, now that I'm thinking about it in an academic way and looking at the theory of it, I can identify with those terms, and some of them to a greater extent, as in the being attentive, the responsibility, the competent, which was really just a bit of luck on my part that that I was in that position, and that is thanks to being involved in the Open Education Resources project at CPUT, and the being responsive. Although what stands out for me personally is the solidarity aspect. That is something that I think I'm going to take. That's my take-home message from this whole incident, from what fees must fall that happened last year, and that is actually related to the reason why the fees must fall is an indicator. Well, we all know this of something that is much greater, but at the bottom line is students want to have a better future. And I don't know if that has made any sense. So that is all that I have to add.
Thanks, Bronwyn. I mean, if you thought back, would you do it any differently now, or would you still do whatever you've done again?
I wouldn't do it any differently. There is maybe one aspect. I admire the fact that Cheryl thought ahead and thought about protecting the students' anonymity. There's nothing that I think I would have done besides that. I don't think that there is anything that I would have done differently. I think that it was desperate times, and it just called for innovative practices. And I think that I actually think that what we did was good work, because it made a difference. I really think it made a difference.
Interesting.
No, I was going to latch onto something that you said yesterday, where you had we had spoken about the reasons why, and I don't know if you were planning on discussing this later, but the reasons why, despite the fact that we understood that it is because of very valid reasons that the students were protesting, the ultimate reason or the ultimate goal is to get an education, which is why I think the lecturers that did push ahead and did want to finish, I think they had that goal in mind.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I mean, we had these questions that we shared before the seminar already. Is there anything that, I mean, from the participants here, is there anything from your side? Any thoughts, any feelings about the fees must fall? Would you have continued teaching? Under what conditions would you have continued teaching? I know not all of you are from South Africa, but have there been similar ethical dilemmas that you have had to navigate in your country? Would you mind sharing? We'd like to hear from you. I agree, Nicola. I think that happened last year. We saw that a lot, that the staff that were not prepared, that had not thought about blended learning in advance, that had not used it or negotiated access and things like that with the students, were panicked and did things not always in the best possible way. I see Nicola and Tonya typing. Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, I mean, for me, that really, for me, the question, and I think it focused for me a lot around that, the development of those guides that we shared on online teaching and learning and assessment. And the way we shared them in some ways might have given people the idea that it's actually quite easy to, to just do online learning. Suddenly you have this guide, you have suggestions on what you do. And the kind of message that we shared with those guides, for me, was quite problematic in some ways. And I'm not sure if as academic staff developers we are always aware of that.
Hi, I thought I'd just comment on the questions in front of us. I can only speak from my own practice, but this semester I've opted to continue doing open practice and to embrace the learning material that I used last semester, as well as develop more. And the process that happened online last semester is very much happening now in the classroom and online. And obviously, it's up to me to control and be appropriate and be ethical all the time. All I wanted to say was, as opposed to FMF and the more traditional semester we're having now, it is to the students' benefit to know about your practice as extensively as possible. So, for example, I've established a Google Drive for every subject that I teach, and all the material that I develop, whatever it is, from PDFs to PowerPoint to videos, I load on that drive, and the students, they send an email address and I give them access. Of course, these are registered students, so they know about it, and it's no surprise to them if we need to use it in the event of any type of emergency. So, not that we want to be negative and say, it could happen again, but it would be so much better if students knew what to do or where to go or what to use. Yes, that is on top of Blackboard. So I really pick up a pen. I mean, I'm extraordinarily active on my laptop. And I've built this up over time. But at the end of the day, one must start with something and build a repository of resources. And it's always good to have your students interacting with your material. So whatever comes, you can make an effort that you are comfortable to make, but it will make a difference. That's just an overarching comment on these questions. Thank you.
I can see some more typing going on. The audience is very quiet. Alice, Catherine, do you have any feedback, any questions, your own ideas on the ethics of offering blended learning? Would you do it?
Thanks, Daniela. Yeah, I see folks are still chatting in the chat. Um, Just want to make a brief, quickly actually just say thanks to our presenters, Daniela, Bronwyn and Cheryl, for engaging us in this very important topic. And perhaps we can continue the discussion on the Facebook page. The recording for today's session we posted on the Emerge Africa YouTube channel, as well as on the Facebook page. So I'm just sharing that link again. And if you haven't watched Cheryl and Bronwyn's videos yet, they are linked there as well. Daniela, would you like to add anything?
No, I think it was, yeah, I mean, there's always so many more questions than answers. I don't think we can ever finish talking about this or get to a point where we feel that we have actually understood or found, you know, a satisfying solution. I think it's an ongoing, as Tronto says, it's an ongoing practice and it's never done. You know, it's as you continue to engage with these challenges that yeah, that we are getting, or that we are continuing to improve our practice and to live as well as possible, knowing that we can never reach the perfect position or point. So I think those are important things to keep in mind, that it's an ongoing practice to live as well as we can, and it's a continuous pushing ourselves to think about these uncomfortable topics a lot more. And I think for me it's just another, you know, it's just so clear that everything we do has ethical implications. So I think what we need to stop doing is to think of technology as this neutral space that, you know, we're just offering a service and we shouldn't think about whether or not that's ethical. I think it's clear that whatever we do, we are engaged in ethical or unethical practices. So we need to be very aware of that. But I have one question to Cheryl. So are you saying that the Fees Must Fall moved you from Blackboard to a more open space? So are you using Google Drive now and not Blackboard anymore?
Well, okay. I can never stop using Blackboard because I think it would be against the institutional project for me to use any other medium and exclude Blackboard. But what I do is, and I know it's a lot of work, but look, I learned the overarching lesson of, you know, start the way you mean to finish. So I put a lot of work into having things ready at the start. But it's always growing, of course. But I had a lot when I started the semester. So I'm able to put everything on Blackboard the same time as what I put it on Google Drive. And as you know, I love my phone and I love my laptop. So for me, it's nothing to, you know, just like have a cup of coffee, watch the TV and be busy on my phone. So I'm very comfortable with technology, so it's never a problem. So yes, I portal on Blackboard, I portal on Google Drive. I'm super comfortable with WhatsApp. I'm just appropriate about the time of the day. I advertise that to the students that after a certain time, etc., I won't look at it. And email, you know, email's great, but I'm time appropriate. So I think what the students recognize is that I will respond, and this is why I have the interaction that I enjoy.
Thank you, Cheryl. Daniela, I see your mic's still on. Did you want to say something more? I know you've got to get to another webinar. but I thought let me just check. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thanks again to our presenters, Daniela, Cheryl, and Bronwyn. And just a reminder all to please, keep the discussion going on the Facebook event page. And feel free to share your approaches to blended learning. And let's keep the discussion going. Okay, bye, everyone.